Hi there, Steve Kaufman, talking about languages again. There are many myths in language learning. One of the most damaging is the idea that past a certain age we can no longer learn languages, or adults can't learn languages, or as you get older your ability to learn languages deteriorates, diminishes. Not true. It might be theoretically, or somebody might demonstrate scientifically that the neuroplasticity declines, but you can still learn. Okay? You might have learned faster at the age of 20 and a little more slowly at the age of 50, although that has not been my experience. My experience has been that I learn better now than when I was 20 because I know how to learn better. I'm more confident now. And of course, there's so many more resources available to help you learn. So the reason I raise this subject is because apparently there was a study done in a magazine called Cognition, which sought to demonstrate, they did some test, which I don't fully understand, but the result of which, the conclusion was that we can't learn languages to fluency after the age of 10. All right? So let's start right there. And by the way, this was picked up by Time magazine and by The Guardian in England. All right? I was at the Langue Fest, the Festival des Langues in Montreal, where you had 400 polyglots. I addressed them, and I asked these 400 polyglots in this big, auditorium. I said, how many of you grew up in a multilingual family? In other words, we're in a situation where you were hearing lots of languages. I think one or two people put up their hands. So overwhelmingly, these several hundred people learned these languages as adults, and many of them spoke 5, 6, 10 plus languages. So it's not just me, and it's the same when I visit the polyglot gatherings in Europe. Most people learn most of their languages as adults. Now, in the Time magazine, they quote the study and talk about how, that they quizzed people on their reaction to certain English phrasing, and that this would demonstrate that they were either German speakers or French speakers or whatever. Fluency, as I said before, if you are a German speaker speaking English, there's a high probability that there are certain phrases that will reflect your German. Like I said, I've been living in Canada since many years. I can hear people say that to me in flawless English. People who have wonderful pronunciation, who can read any novel in the book, who are totally conversant in the language, and there are certain structures that somehow they're stuck with whatever came to them from their native language. So what? They're still fluent speakers of the language, all right? In the Guardian article about this Cognition study, the fellow says, I'm not going to accept that I can't learn, I'm going to go try and learn, and then he spends the rest of the article talking about Duolingo. Duolingo is not going to get you to fluency. Duolingo is sort of an initiator. If you are not strongly motivated to learn, you can get onto Duolingo, do some very basic, simple things, and have the impression that you are getting a bit of not even a toehold, but a bit of an entry into the language. Ultimately, if you want to learn, you're going to have to expose yourself to lots and lots of content. And this is the other thing that's missing. Whenever they talk about what you can learn as an adult or whatever, they always look at people who study at schools. You don't learn a language in a classroom. As Manfred Spitzer, famous German neuroscientist whom I often quote, said, we don't learn languages in a classroom, we learn languages in our brain. So the question becomes, how do we get the language into the brain? And this comes down to, how do we motivate people? How do we motivate people to do enough with the language, in the language, so that the brain starts to get used to the language? That needn't be limited to what happens in the classroom. In fact, what happens in the classroom, what's most important there is to what extent can the teacher or the classroom environment stimulate, encourage, guide, support, and make the learner want to learn the language independently. Make the learner want to spend enough time listening and reading in order to make some progress. And that reminds me of another thing that I saw on Twitter, where Stephen Krashen said apparently there's a lot of talk on the internet or amongst teachers and saying, you should have 90% target language in the classroom? And Stephen Krashen says, it doesn't matter. If the 90% target language is incomprehensible to the student, it's not doing them any good. What's more important is, can you get the learner to commit themselves to doing enough listening and reading in the language? And in that regard, the teacher using the learner's language, sometimes to explain, sometimes to translate, sometimes to encourage, all of this can be very valuable, because the most of the learning will take place outside the classroom if the learner is willing to engage with the language, listen, read, and do things in the language. So, and if a learner is prepared to do those things, it doesn't matter if the learner is 8 years old, 12 years old, 20 years old, 60 years old, 72 years old. It doesn't matter. We can learn at whatever age. And by the way, whatever our nationality. I don't believe that certain national groups, Swedes or Singaporeans or Ethiopians, where there's a high degree of multilingualism, that those people are naturally more gifted, or that they have some genetic predisposition to learning languages. Anybody can learn if they have the right attitude and if they spend enough time at it. And so the classroom as sort of the model, this doesn't work because it didn't work in the classroom, is wrong. Yes, ideally immersion, go to the country, spend the day talking to people, whatever, but that's not practical for most people. So you create a world of immersion, you create a world of interesting, comprehensible content, initially not so interesting, and then you build up to a point where you can actually be doing a lot of listening and reading on things of interest, and gradually the brain gets used to the language. So, is there an ideal age at which to learn? I don't think so. And I wanted to add one more thing, because in this discussion back and forth, and you get people saying, well, we just learn the way kids learn, and the kids don't read, they learn anyway and stuff. True enough. But I can, in 6 months, in most languages, I can reach a level of vocabulary in 6 months that takes the child 5 years or longer to achieve. So the child may be more fluent, the child may pronounce better, but if we're talking about the ability to communicate and understand a language, we can learn at any age, and we can learn to fluency. Fluency, not perfection. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.